My name is Bodie Bemrose, and I'm married to Christy Creamer, who was my high school sweetheart. We attended grade school and high school here in the Central School District. I have 4 daughters, Kaya, who's 16, Ellie, who's 11, Kaylee, 9 years old, and Ashley, our 7-year-old. And my wife runs a small boutique store here in Monmouth as well, called The Find. I grew up in Independence, but in a community south of town, out in the country, called Buena Vista. And that was a farm that we enjoyed very much. Growing up, we had a short stint in Monmouth. Dad got tired of fixing fences. The cows kept getting out. He decided to lease the farm and moved to the city. No more mowing the yard for 3 hours. And so we moved to Craven Street for 2 years, but within 6 months he was ready to move back. Neighbors were too close, but we couldn't because he leased the farm out for 2 years. And so once the 2 years was up, we were back on the farm. And so I got a little exposure to city life, which I enjoyed, but I think my heart has always been in the country, though, especially after we moved back. Louis and Roberta Bemrose graduated from Corvallis High School in 1960. They were also high school sweethearts, and they married in 1960, and just recently celebrated or a couple years ago, their 50th wedding anniversary. And Mom and Dad introduced us to the farm life after they had my 2 older brothers. They were quite a few years older than me. My oldest brother, Jeff, graduated from Central in 1980, and then my other brother, Matt, graduated in 1983, and then I graduated in 1991. But Matt and Jeff started out in the city, in Corvallis, and right before I was born, Mom and Dad took the boys to the country, and so we started a new life in the country in around 1972, right before I was born. My parents and my grandparents instilled in me and my brothers the value of hard work. We were a little unique because where we lived in Buena Vista definitely was in the boonies. Our nearest neighbor was a mile away, and we lived in an old 1913 farmhouse. It was an old dairy farm, and there was lots of outbuildings, a lot of barns. And my dad was an only child. My grandmother, who is 97, still alive, she was the oldest of 11 children, and she grew up in Airlie, Oregon. But my mom had only one sister, and she lived in Wyoming, and her parents lived in Montana. And so there wasn't much family around besides the 5 of us, and then Grandma and Grandpa, and then I had a great uncle named Uncle Charlie that he lived well into his 90s, and he never married, and he lived with Grandma and Grandpa. So a full house at Christmas time was 8 people. That was as packed as it got. And so it really was kind of like Little House on the Prairie growing up. And Grandma and Grandpa had a half-acre garden, and they did all the canning. And then we raised livestock. We had Black Angus beef, and we had hogs and sheep and chickens. And we cut our own hay and stored for the winter. And so we didn't, when we went to town to get groceries, it was for milk, because we didn't have a milk cow, but ice cream, Doritos, more fun stuff. But all the basic food that we consumed was what we raised. And I didn't really realize I was different until I moved to town when we and saw, like, whoa, the big city, here in Monmouth, things are different. And but at first, though, all those years, and growing up with similar families, riding on the bus, everyone did some farming or some self-sufficiency of some, even though maybe they they worked a job, they still had animals or at least farm part-time. But the value of work, hard work, was common. We had 2 wood stoves, and my dad was a timber faller, and he worked with my grandfather. They were a cutting team, and Mom was more the homesteader, the farmer. So she kind of managed the farm, stayed home, and attended the animals and whatnot, and Dad worked in the woods. But we had chores. There's always something to do on a farm. You know, cutting firewood, bucking hay, you know, fixing, you know, the roof that's from the windstorm that's blowing off the barn, or there was just always work to do, but we had to do it together. And then watching Grandma and Grandpa work hard together and come over and help us on things. So we were never, work was just part of it, and it was just, they taught us a very good work ethic. And we always went to church. I was baptized here in the Episcopal Church, the old church here, but most of our time was going to the Lutheran Church, Faith Lutheran Church on the S-curves. And so between being out on the farm or church, our hobbies were going to school. That was an outlet. We always looked forward to going to school. And sports. My brothers were all very active in sports. I was very active in sports. Football. I was on the Dallas Blue Dolphins and then ran track. And but my brother was a very good drummer. He's a very good musician. And I always looked up to him and wanted to play an instrument, but I wasn't sure what I could play. And he was dating a gal named Wendy Gately. She graduated from South Salem High School, and at that time they were going to OCE here, and she was a music major, and so was my brother. And she was the only person we knew that had MTV. And after practice, which was about 7 o'clock at night when the Dallas Blue Dolphins would get done, and we'd practice at the OCE pool, she had an apartment just down the street. And so I remember vividly one night Mom said, I can't get you till later, you're going to have to walk to Wendy's house or Wendy's apartment, and then I'll pick you up there. So, and Jeff and Wendy might have been engaged at this time, but she had her own apartment, and we went there, or I went there, and she said, well, you want to watch TV? And I said, sure. And she turned on MTV. And then there was a documentary on the band The Who, and they were showing live footage of The Who at Woodstock, and I was just totally mesmerized. And after watching Pete Townsend play his guitar and smash it, I just said, I got to play guitar. I got to. And so Wendy, she could play anything. She played piano, violin, guitar. And so I got a guitar, and Wendy gave me my first lessons. And Wendy and Jeff got married, and she's been the music teacher at MES for many years, and also at Central. And so music is very much a part of their lives, and it has been sort of suppressed with me. Although I play guitar every day, no one knows it. So that was I guess you'd say, the value of talent. My mom always wanted us to venture and try to find our talents, and everyone had a different talent. And you didn't know your talent until you tried many things. So Mom was very supportive of, branching out. My father and my grandmother side, they were very quiet, very pioneer-like, just, worked. You didn't go to really social events or much. Your social events were with family. And but my mom was the social butterfly. She was the one that did all the communicating. Dad, being a woodsman and then came home on the farm, he was totally content just being out in the middle of nowhere, and didn't socialize much. But Mom got us out. And for instance, I remember she was trying to bake a a pie and she didn't have enough sugar, and so she's like, we have to go to the neighbor and see if we can borrow a cup of sugar. And my dad would never ever do that, and so we did. We went down the road and just, this house looks good, and we drove up, and she meet a stranger, and I'm baking a pie and I need sugar, can you loan me some sugar? And so Mom was very good with interacting with people. And then Mom also dabbled in real estate. She bought some fixer-uppers in Monmouth and Independence, and that was another form of work that we viewed as, we dreaded the rentals. We didn't mind farm work so much, but I know both my brothers and I, we dreaded the rentals. I don't know why so much. It just was pulling carpet or painting, and we did not like it, but somewhere along the line it got in my roots, because that's the career path I took, was in real estate. I learned early on that it pays to buy good quality guitars. So all my stuffs are Gibsons. And then I learned that, Fender or Gibson, and you have a taste in your style of music. And I mean, I like Fender's guitars, they're awesome guitars, but for the sound I want, the Gibson guitars is what I always liked. Later in my older years, I've picked up acoustic. I mean, I kind of first started out with acoustic to get the basic lessons. Wendy gave me just the very basic, my bass, chords, spar chords, but I'm self-taught after that, and it came very natural to me. So I can't read music, but if you play, like I hear it on the radio, I can play it pretty quickly. But rock and roll is not too technical, so that's right. 3 chords, you pretty much can figure out the song. So, but yeah, I have an old arch top, 1935 arch top that I found in Portland that was dirt cheap, and the reason it was cheap, he's like, well, he goes, I think it's an old Epiphone. He says, but the guy fixed the headstock and he painted over the name or where it would have been, and there was no serial numbers on it, and that is just my jam. That old arch top is just such a cool old sound, and that's good for playing blues or kind of that folk sound, and which I like that. I mean, I see, growing up with such older people in my life. My great-grandfather and my Uncle Charlie that came out on the wagon train, everyone on my grandma's side lived to be in their late 90s, and having older brothers, all the music I listened to was late 60s or early 70s rock. And so in the 80s, I hated 80s music when it was popular. I didn't want to hear it. I was Ted Nugent and CCR. I was a big George Thorogood fan before he ever got discovered, and I play a lot of slide. That's what I really like playing, the slide guitar. And but we did finally, my brother and I, my oldest brother, the drummer, we formed a band before I was married in the 90s, and we did play bars and some other stuff. We actually even played at the Independence 4th of July when they first started the live bands down there, and that was before the amphitheater was fixed up and done down there. People complained we were too loud. So Jeff, he's the oldest. He's 12 years older than I am. So when I started first grade, he had already graduated, and then Matt was 5 years, or not quite 5 years, I guess 3 years after Jeff. So he graduated in '83. Jeff was very funny, very easygoing. He still is. Matt was a great actor. I don't know why he didn't pursue acting more beyond high school. because he was always in all the plays, and he was very funny. He was more the wild child, and he knew how to have fun, and I enjoyed watching those guys grow up. And I know a lot of people in their age group just because I was always either with my brothers, either at school, whether they were at football practice or track practice, or the music events with Jeff, or the plays. I was just kind of this little kid, following them around, and following my parents around. And Matt ended up going to Southern Oregon University, and he met a gal down there, and they got married. And then he moved to Portland, and he's never come back. Matt attended Southern Oregon University, and he met a gal down there named Jody, and they got married and moved to Portland area. And then Matt started a company of his own. They're doing a background screening, background investigations for employee applications, and then background checks for rental properties, for apartment complexes and whatnot, for tenants. And he never moved back. He still lives up there, and with his family. He's got 3 kids. And Jeff didn't go too far. He first went to Oregon State University and then transferred to OCE, and where he met Wendy. And he lives in Dallas, Oregon. But Jeff took over my parents' janitorial business, which was my dad's way out of logging. After my grandpa retired, it was just my dad and the outfit that he was working for, and he had a series of close calls. And in logging, they say they come in threes. The third one, you're dead. And he had 2 in a short period of time. And then at that time, my mom also she bought a little janitorial business during that time from one of our tenants, and he was a pastor. And it was a dream come true for him, but he had no time to sell or market his business. And he had a really tiny congregation in town. And so to make ends meet, he had this little janitorial business. And my mom, she's a clean freak, and she's always ambitious for a project. She said, well, I'm good at cleaning, maybe I'll buy your business. And so she did. She bought this little janitorial business that cleaned Les Schwab and the city library and the city shops and various doctors' offices. And so Mom, and at that time it was just me at home, and that was when I was in high school. And I remember getting done with a football game, coming home late, from Toledo or wherever, but then going to work right when we were done, because they'd be working at night. But it was good timing that my mom got that business, because she shortly thereafter got diagnosed with diabetes. And then my dad was having a couple close calls in the woods, and so he thought, maybe this is time to retire from the woods, and I'll help your mom do the janitorial business, besides she needs to have someone around her with the diabetes. And so then they worked the little business for a long time until they retired. And then Jeff at that time was working for Hewlett Packard and wanted to do something different, and so it all worked out, and Jeff does the janitorial. We all had hot rod cars. My dad was very much that was his outlet and hobby, was street rods or fast cars. And so on the farm, because you have lots of outbuildings, you've got lots of room to store junk cars. And my brothers would buy a jalopy for $50 somewhere and drive it all over the gravel roads around our farm in Buena Vista, and then they get tired of it and put a for sale sign and sell it and buy another $25 or $50 car. And they would just, run them into the ground in the fields. And Jeff was working on his project with Dad, and that was for his first car, and that was a 1941 Ford. And Dad kept the old Corvette engine that he had. He used to have a 61 Corvette, and he pulled that engine and replaced it, sold the vet, and that engine went into my brother's 41. So my brother's first car was a 41 Ford, and he still has it. Matt was probably a lot wiser because he saw how much work and anguish went into these cars. And he didn't want a project, but he wanted a hot rod. And so Matt got one that was, a runner, and he could be driving, right now. And so Matt bought a 67 Cougar, and he drove it. But he doesn't have that anymore. He wishes he had it. And then mine, I was trying to follow the footsteps, and we had an old 1936 Chevy pickup laying around the farm, and I thought, well, I'll restore it. And after searching the countryside at all the swap meets between Washington and Oregon, this is before the internet, that was the only way to find parts for these cars, and we could not find a decent pair of fenders. And so I abandoned that project, and I needed something that was a little bit more together. And we found a 31 Model A in Independence, and talked the guy into selling that. And that was my project, and I got that done. So my first car was a 31 Model A, two-door sedan. It had been hot rodded in the 50s, so it was already chopped. You could barely see out the windshield, and I still have it. And so that was cars were a big deal, and that was fueled by watching the movie American Graffiti. I mean, that was the dream. So if we could be, I was a fan of Both Alpha, which was Harrison Ford in the movie. But anyway, that was very much our youth and activities that my brothers and I, shared in, besides sports. So as I was going to Central High School, this was the monkey wrench years working on my car. People were thinking about college. I wasn't so much. And at that time, my freshman year, if I was going to do anything, it was going to be in art, because I could draw. And my art teacher at Central, there was a couple of us that she wanted us to go and look at Seattle Art Institute because she thought we had a career in art. And at that time, the trends were, graphic art. Computers are going to change the world of art, and we should think about that. And I wanted to do cartooning because my mom's dad, that lived in Montana, which was a rancher, he influenced me a great deal to doodle and draw cartoons, because he would write me letters and he'd always have a sketch, and that encouraged me to write him back, and then I would draw a sketch, and we did that for years. And he had an opportunity to work for Walt Disney in the 40s, but he couldn't afford the trip to get to California. So there was some regret there that he never did that, and he was phenomenal. I mean, and so I had a good role model to nurture the drawing. And but when we went to the art school to visit it, I was totally turned off, because the artists there were doing, very much modern art. I had never seen someone with purple hair or piercings in their face, and it seemed like everyone was like that. And I wasn't seeing any cool animation or cartoons. It was, stuff splattered on canvas, and I didn't think that was, in my view, my rural Polk County view of art, that wasn't art, and that wasn't me, and it turned me off. And I got disenchanted with it, and I thought, I gotta do something else. Besides that, you'd always hear, starving artist, and I think, that doesn't seem appealing to me. I don't want to be a starving artist. And so then the next actual inspiration actually came from when I was dating my wife, Christy, at the time. They lived a little bit out here on Mistletoe Road, and she was one of 10 kids, and her father was a CPA. And we didn't know anyone that wore a tie or business suit. And so I got exposed to this, the business realm, so to speak, because that's what her dad did. And I remember going over there and they were cooking shrimp. I thought, shrimp? Who has shrimp for dinner? And they had 10 kids and they had a nice house, and I was like, how's he pay to feed all these kids? And well, he was a CPA. He's a businessman. So it forced me to have to just kind of maybe branch out and look into something else. I was not a good student by any means. I didn't have a very good GPA in high school. I mean, I followed my brother's footsteps, which were be in sports, be active, have fun. I had a hot rod car, which, we knew how to have fun, and that meant a little bit of mischief. But grades were not a huge priority growing up. My parents just wanted to make sure that we were doing our best, we weren't flunking, but more importantly, that we were working and not laying around. So we always had jobs. We worked every summer for various farmers. My brothers grew up working for the Olson farms. And then I started out working for Howard Pope. And then I went, for most of my high school years, I worked for Wendell Sperling and Phil Sperling out at the Sperling farm, at the grass seed farm. And we worked 7 days a week and 14-hour days, because that is the only way we could save enough money to pay for college. And I didn't have any loans for college. I saved all my money for college. But before that, in high school, I really didn't know what direction I wanted to take. But I decided, well, I got to go to college. And my older brother said, look, just go to college just to finish college. Because that's the most important thing, is just starting and finishing it. Don't ever do something, don't start something and not finish it. Just finish it, and it'll open up doors. Besides, no one in either family on both sides had ever gone to college. So my brothers and I were the first family members on my mom's and dad's side to ever go to college. So it was a big deal to get to go to college. And so I was barely able to get into Oregon State University, and I majored in business, very generically. And because I was pretty ambitious, I was intrigued by different opportunities to make money. Besides, I needed to. I had to pay for my car insurance, my gas, my housing, everything. So even though I was attending school and I had saved money to pay for tuition and whatnot, I still needed to be active, because my mom would remind me, you need to have a part-time job or be doing something to stay busy. I was like, well, I am busy, Mom. I'm taking classes. That wasn't busy enough. So I didn't like how my time was so monopolized by working for other people part-time. And so I thought, maybe I'll do a little business venture or do something. And I saw an opportunity. I joined Delta Tau Delta fraternity. And the reason there wasn't for academics. My freshman year, I wasn't in a fraternity. And at that time, I was living with a buddy that graduated a year above me named Lance Kirk. And his mom and dad ran the hop farm out in, off Wigwich Road, which now is Rogue Brewery. And being single, where's all the parties? Or where's all the girls? And, well, the girls were at the fraternity parties, and you couldn't get into the fraternity party unless you were a fraternity member. All the girls could get in, but the guys couldn't. And again, my experience My stereotype experience with the Greek system was the movie Animal House. And so we always thought the fraternities were very, you know, staunch and preppy, and we're farm kids, you know, we would never, that's not us. But we thought we'd at least go through rush week. And we did learn that, you know, each house was different. And we found a house that there was a lot of ranch kids from Eastern Oregon, people we could relate to. And we did like the fact that they did have study hours, and there were some things you had to maintain a GPA, which that was what we could sell to our parents was, look, Mom, we're going to get better grades. They force you to study. And so anyway, we joined the fraternity that next year, and those were great years. And I saw an opportunity. We had t-shirts for every party. And the t-shirts would some days be $13 or they'd be $7 at different parties, and the artwork was awful. And here I had you know, I could draw. So I asked the social chairman, I said, look, I think I can do a better job designing these t-shirts, and I think I can get the cost down. And he says, fine, do it. And we have the barn dance party coming up. So I did the barn dance t-shirt. Everyone signed up and bought it, and I made a little bit of money, and I thought, you know what, maybe I'll just do them all. And so they designated me as the t-shirt designer. And we had a large fraternity, so we had 120 guys, and when we had organized parties, it was with another sorority or two sororities and another fraternity. So real quick, we'd have 500 people signing up for a t-shirt. And so I could make much more money and drawing and designing it with what I was good at. And so that was my solution, to be able to have a little more flexibility with my schedule and still have a part-time income coming in and make Mom happy. And it worked out. And that was my first business kind of, you know, venture, creating something on my own. Then it kind of grew into throwing concerts and being a guitar player and appreciating good rock and roll. I started booking bands, and when I was at Oregon State, and so I would design the t-shirts, and then I'd book the bands, and then it led to, I was also the guy getting the beer, the kegs, so I was making money from the t-shirts, the bands, and the beer. And everyone was having a great time, and it kind of got bigger and bigger each year, and I would still work all summer long, and that's what helped me pay for all my college education. And I didn't realize it, but I was getting a good business background just through experience. And then what I was realizing in my business classes was, this is just a bunch of math and other economics. You know, I'm learning far more, and we don't talk about all the stuff that I'm going through, you know, dealing with here in real life in business. And the one thing I think that I needed to work on was my communication skills. And I had to take some speech classes, which I dreaded. That was a requirement with my business classes. But my speech classes seemed to be more relevant towards business than the business classes. So I switched my major to speech, and besides that, I didn't have to take as much math. And that's what I ended up getting a degree in 1996. I graduated from Oregon State University with a speech and communications degree. But at the end, the story how I get into real estate was, I thought at that time things were rocking and rolling, and I was going to be a rock and roll promoter. I was going to book bands. I was going to start getting the big bands. And my counselor helped me get a internship that I created myself that was 16 credits, so I could take one term was designated to putting on a concert, a big one. And so I booked 7 bands for a all-day rock festival at Benton County Fairgrounds called the Fandango Rock Festival. And the headliners were Quiet Riot and Pat Travers. And then their other bands were more not local, but they were regional acts from California, Canada, Seattle that were gaining momentum and getting quite a following on the college circuit. And so it was going to be perfect timing. I was going to book these 7 bands. I was going to get big promoters or sponsors like Henry Weinhardt's, which I did. I had Windermere was a big sponsor, and we had all the bells and whistles. The big, large stage, which was used. We had to tear it down quickly after the show because it was being hauled up to the Portland Meadows for the Grateful Dead's last show, or Jerry Garcia's last show. And long story short, I lost money on that one. I thought I was going to graduate with a pot full of money and be on my way as a good start, and here I was going into my senior year, facing potential bankruptcy. What happened was it was a wild show, but I didn't have near as much security, and in waves, people were jumping over the fence. And I had to have all my security that was around the perimeter on the stage floor to control the crowd when Pat Travers and Quiet Riot were on, because it was, and here was the kicker, was we had 300 kegs of beer and you got free beer with your purchase of your ticket. And I don't think the OLCC even had any clue of what they were approving when I got that liquor license to do that. But needless to say, it was a real rowdy event, and thousands of people there. I learned a great deal. I did it all by myself, but I had a $9,000 beer tab with Riverside Hogan. My grandma Vera actually helped me. She ponied up some money to help me, and so at the end I was facing down the barrel of owing $17,000 to the sound company, grandma, and the beer company. But I paid it all off within a year, except for grandma, because she could wait. And at that time I had kept my Model A and had to have something more practical, which ironically I didn't have a practical car. I was driving a 23 T-Bucket Roadster, which I actually traded title for title for a 64 Ford Fairlane that I had gotten, that was my daily driver, that I needed to get rid of because the police knew that car and I was getting too many tickets and I just needed to get rid of it. And for some reason I thought a 23 T-Bucket Roadster was going to be more tame, but I had to have it. But I had to sell the T-Bucket Roadster, and I worked all summer long, extra hours, over 100 hours a week at Sperling Farms, and I paid everyone off except grandma within that year, and I got grandma paid off within 3 years after I got my first job in downtown Portland. So, in a roundabout way, how did I get into real estate and what I'm doing now? I was very defeated from that concert, and I thought, I'm not doing this. This is no fun. So the rock promotion business was out of the question. I was a senior at Oregon State University. I did not know what I wanted to do with my life. And my mom said, well, you've got one term off, because I only had 2 more terms. I was a 5th year senior. And I wanted to graduate in spring. So fall term, I took off. I was going to take winter and spring and graduate with it and walk with everybody. And mom said, well, you need to be busy. I don't want you just living down there in Corvallis and not staying busy. You should be taking some classes. I said, well, I don't need to take any more classes because I'm set to graduate in June. So she goes, well, what do you want to do with your life? Or, what's the plan now? And I said, I don't know. And she says, well, you should go to real estate school so you stay busy. And even if you don't want to get into real estate, it's good knowledge to have even if you buy one house in your lifetime. And you'll probably end up buying a house, so it'll be good knowledge for you. So I kind of did it just to make mom happy. And so I enrolled in the Norm Webb School of Realty in Salem, and they only met once a week for like 4 hours. and I loved it. He was a great teacher. I didn't realize it, but I retained the background knowledge of when my mom would put us to work on rental property, dealing with tenants. And it just seemed hands-on, which I was very hands-on, and I got very intrigued with it. And that January, before I graduated, I took my state and federal exam and I passed. And so before I graduated from Oregon State, I had my real estate license. But I didn't want to sell houses. I wanted to, do something different in real estate. And I asked Mr. Webb, what else can you do in real estate if you don't want to sell houses? He says, well, you can be a property manager and or be a developer. And these are all kinds of things you can do. So I was intrigued with that. And he says, but if you're going to make a career of it, Bodie, he says, you need to be on the front lines. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he says, well, you need to deal with the leaky roofs, the angry tenants, all the negative stuff, the stuff that's not fun with real estate. And you're only going to learn that through property management. He says, so I would go to work for a property management company if I were you. And then if you decide to sell real estate, you'll be the best salesman there is because you know the product. You know everything about real estate. And he says, most brokers don't know the product. They just get into sales and they start selling it, but they're not good problem solvers because they don't know how to solve the problems that go along with real estate. So that made sense. And because my brother had his business in Portland, Matt, a lot of his clients were real estate property management companies. And Matt said, well, here, let's get the top 10 list out, the report of the top 10 companies. And he says, I'd send resumes to all these guys. And then one name kept popping up, it was American Property Management. He says, don't even bother trying to get to that guy. That guy's too huge. He's never gonna hire you. I've tried to get his account for years and he's just too big. He does everything in-house. So I thought, well, I'm gonna call him myself and submitted a resume. And he was the first guy to respond to me. His name was Joe Weston. And Joe Weston called me up, sat me down, and he said, what I want you to do is keep interviewing, and I know you want to get in the business. It's going to be hard because you need experience, and no one wants to hire someone with no experience. But try to get a job, and because I'd like to hire someone with experience. So it's like, okay. So I did, and that was the thing. No one wanted to hire me because I had no experience. And so I went back to him after a month and said, well, everyone, just like you said, wants experience, including you. And he says, I tell you what, I will create a position for you. Now, granted, this is the largest property owner this side of the Mississippi. Next to Phil Knight, he's the wealthiest man in Oregon. And he's a private company. It's no shares out on the stock market. And he had over 3,000 apartment units, and he owned many, many downtown commercial high-rise buildings and at that time, about 3 million square feet of commercial property. And he was very much an old industrialist. He was very non-assuming. He drove a beat-up VW Bug. His tire was crooked. But he had a staff of over 150 men just in the service department that maintained their properties. He had 2 full-time garbage trucks because he hauled his own garbage. He did all of his own roofs, his janitorial, his landscaping. Everything was internal and very vertically integrated company. And he would put ads in the paper, this business journal, at the end of the year stating local investor needs to place $25 million and purchase commercial property by December 31st. He had this machine that he needed to continue to grow for tax purposes. And here he was going to create a position for me. And so I went to work under his vice president of the residential division, which was Gary Miller. And Gary Miller is now my business partner in the Monmouth Holding Company that we started, which is now my full-time job in saving and restoring historic downtown properties. And so, skip forward to 2003 when I started my own little company, BC Bemrose and Company. In a strange roundabout way, these buildings, I guess you would say, are kind of a way that I can do art, because they require designing and drawing plans and creating something. And I really appreciate the history of our pioneer ancestors. And when they expanded in the West here, everything they did was just top quality. And I appreciate the artistic quality of these old buildings. And I think that's probably one of the main reasons why I love history and historic property. But also, when you don't have anything or no money to get into the game, so to speak, when you're trying to get into real estate as an investor, you have to buy the things that no one wants. And those were the old historic buildings that needed lots of work, dilapidated, and you had to put sweat equity into them. And that's how I got started, was when I was working for Joe Weston at American Property. I was buying, little dumpy historic homes, fixing them up on the weekends, and then I would sell one and then roll it into another project, and then just kind of. And Mr. Weston was very good. He always said, try not to sell anything, but if you're going to sell something, reinvest that. If you spend it, well, you're starting all over again, and try to let the money work for you. So I've always done that. I've always rolled if I sell something, it's always went into another project or another property. And now, in today's day and age, I don't think I'm going to see any Social Security, so these old buildings are my Social Security, I hope. And so this is my retirement plan, and I hope it works. But real estate is very can be challenging, and there's never a dull moment, and there's always surprise expenses, and it's definitely a long-term game or strategy. But that's how I got into real estate, and I enjoy it very much, and I feel it is my calling, and it brought me back home. And so when I got married to Christy, when we finally hooked back up and wanted to start a family, I knew once we had our first daughter that metropolitan area is not my wishes to raise a family. I want them to have the experiences I did, and that's maybe closer to the country and in smaller communities where you know your neighbor and or say hi. And so there was very much a tugging of the heart to come back home. Grandma was still here, my mom and dad was still here, her parents were still here. And so but we couldn't do it overnight. We had to move to Aurora first, which we did some historic renovation there on some old historic homes in Aurora, some farmhouses. And then we made the next step and at least got to Polk County. We're not back in Monmouth and Independence, but we are in Polk County. We live in West Salem. And when I came back home, I viewed and respected my community much more because I was looking through a different set of, spectacles. There was things that I took for granted when I was young. You want to go to you want to get out of town. There's nothing going on here, that kind of attitude. And I could now say I did it. I went to the big city and learned what they had to offer. And what I realized is that smaller communities like Monmouth and Independence have a lot more to offer, especially for a family. And so our daughters are the light of our lives. And I keep them active. they'll have a paintbrush in their hand, or they're helping tear down sheetrock, or whenever they can, it's safe. And I try to instill that in them too, as a work ethic. And we do it together. That's the main thing, is that family, we, just like my parents and my grandparents showed us, we work together and we help each other together, through thick or thin. And real estate is a great environment for that, at least for me, because I can't do it all by myself, and that's why I have a great business partner, Gary. And then it takes a team with the community, and Monmouth and Independence are great. Monmouth the community has been great cheerleaders. They have, applauded us and rooted us on, and we would never have gotten that in any other community. And I really am appreciative of and grateful for the town and the community and the folks with our government, our local government, that they appreciate it too. And it's very much, I feel like it's a team effort as a community. So that's what I do.